Baruchim Abayim, welcome to the first of a 6-part series carrying us from Zman Cheresenu all the way through Zman Matan Teresenu. I'm going to be very brief. We have the zchus to have with us, or let me put it this way, as central as Taharas Hamishpacha is to Yiddish home, the cornerstone, that's how central the Rav is in our life and in the life of our entire Shechuna. And he carries much on his shoulders, and we owe the Rav a tremendous debt of Hakaras HaTov. Myself specifically, Taharas Habayis is an arm of the Badats and is under the Beis Din Tzedek of Crown Heights, amongst many projects. We're going to have the zchus to have Rabbi Brown open this series. Without further ado, Rabbi Brown.
First of all, Yoshekoich for arranging the shiurim for Rabbi Yusewitz v'Chala Mesayim. There's not too many things that we find that the Rebbe writes that people should chazer regularly. Ulai nishkechu pratim achadim. Where there's a din that a sheikh is supposed to review Hilchos Shchita every 30 days. Halavai, all sheikhim will actually practice that. There's a few other examples of things that we find in halacha you're supposed to chazer over. But in the Rebbe's letters, as a eitzah, as a regular occurrence, when people write to the Rebbe issues that they have in their personal life, the Rebbe writes them to be midayik and Taharas Hamishpacha, and being the great Malam Tzchus and writing things in a positive way, the Rebbe often writes ulai nishkechu pratim achadim. And if I may say, I don't have that much Ahavas Yisrael, so when I deal with people, I often find that it's not ulai nishkechu, but it's vad. And the reason for this amaratzas and Taharas Hamishpacha, and even amongst Talmid Chacham Muflagim and Yiddish Shamayim who care, is because the system, the Chatchila, is set up in such a way that it's hard to be successful. Nobody starts learning Taharas Hamishpacha before they're married. I mean, before they become Chas and Kala. Unlike any other area in Yiddishkeit that you learned about in a school throughout your life, regardless of how much you listen to in class. Number two, you see it practiced all around you. Taharas Hamishpacha is a very private topic. It's taught to a Chas and Kala during those quick crash courses that they have when they're pressured with a lot of things on top of their head. And then often, as we know in Hilchos Taharas Hamishpacha, the Menekes, things change completely. So you don't get any reinforcement from this halacha from all over, so it's hard for a person to remember it. But at the same time, the achrayus is tremendous, the zchus is tremendous, the impact that Taharas Hamishpacha has on the family is unbelievable. There's a sikh which is not well known. I believe it's L'Kutei Sichos Chelik Yud Gimel in Yusewitz, where the Rebbe writes, as a question that many of us ask, why there's so many kids that are, in today's day lingo, going OTD off the derech? It's a question that we have op-eds about it all the time, but the Rebbe addressed it in the Sikha. And the Rebbe said that it relates to two different inyanim. One of them is kashrus, and the other issue the Rebbe said Taharas Hamishpacha, that because there are so many people that are not really practicing it properly, that has such an impact, and that's why we see the schwere consequences and the terrible consequences that we see. And the zchus is tremendous. People know there's, in Eretz Yisrael, it's like a hit thing, a buzz thing. People know there's moshavim, when they set up shiurim and Taharas Hamishpacha, and everybody who joined that shir is geholfen geworden. And then as people that set up the shir got helped, and people that sponsored the shir got helped, it's even b'derech zgula. So even if people know Taharas Hamishpacha, but just learning it over, I personally, as a Rav, have people that come to me on a regular basis. I wrote to the Rebbe, I got an answer, person opened the Nigger's Kodesh, his Mashpia told him so, to review Taharas Hamishpacha. I'm having a meeting with someone tomorrow night, Chassidishi, the Erlechi, the Talmud Chacham, works in a Moisid, in a yeshiva. He wants to review Taharas Hamishpacha. Well, he has to review Taharas Hamishpacha. He knows that. He realizes something is wrong in the family, and they keep on getting that kind of, and you see sometimes this taka, there was an error somewhere. So let this learning be Mashpia, Shefa, Bracha, on all the Mishtatfim, Eisa Sheyeshne Pei, Veisa Sheyeshne Bezum, Veisa Sheyenene Peyoso, Zara Chayva Kayoma, Banachayim Ezoyne Bekulm Revicha, and Ishkoich for the Magid Yeshurim for giving their time. Hatzlacha Rabba.
Shekoich to the Rav. We're going to hear from Rabbi Mendel Mochkin on Mashpia and Zal of Oholei. One of the projects that Machon Taharas Hamishpacha had the schus to be involved in and is involved in is setting up a team of fresh chassan teachers, in addition to being involved with veteran chassan teachers. And Mendel Mochkin is from the more recent ones, but very, very popular. And he has, Baruch Hashem, with tremendous training, a tremendous chush of hasbara. And we're very lucky, we're privileged to have him b'chlal as a shliach to be maimed botim b'Yisrael, Chassidische Anash families. Today's shir is Ketzad Nitmis. It's a tall order. There's a lot to cover. Say how she becomes Tmeya, Bdikis, Ksamim. I don't know if he's going to touch on Kinuchim, medical procedures, birth. Many of these have to do also with Rabbanim. You need to be Rabbanim that are familiar with the terms. So, being that it's a tall order, there's a lot of details. You have 8.5 by 11s with pens over here, and feel free to use them. And there's a lot of information. It's rigorous. It's only an hour and a bit. At the end of Q&A, you'll have it written down on the side. You'll be able to pass it up. And without further ado, Rabbi Mendel Mochkin.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the Divrei Psicha from the Rav. And thank you, Rabbi Yusewitz, for arranging. Thank you again for all those who came out in person and those who are watching on Zoom. Appreciate the effort. It's very important. The Eibusher should bless everybody with Hatzlacha, Begashmis, Beruchnius, B'tei Vanir Vanigla, Zarachai V'kayome, and all the brachas that you need. So, okay, so just a basic introduction. In general, when we talk about Hilchos Nidda, we know that the relationship between the Eibusher and the Yidden is also resembling the relationship between Ish v'Isha. And when a woman is in a state of Nidda, the relationship between the husband and wife changes. And in the relationship between the Yidden and the Eibusher, even though the concept of Nidda, the Rebbe explains, is coming from the original Chetz Sadas, that as a result of the Chetz Sadas, it says that Chava started receiving Dam Nidda. It was Dam Nidda and Dam Sulim that came as a result, kind of condition of a Yid, that a Yid can't contain something of Chet, something of Ra, something of Tuma, and naturally needs to discharge it, needs to get rid of it. So that's really the silver lining behind part of the concept of discharging, of getting rid of the Dam Nidda. And also the Rebbe brings that we have to always remember that Asheichin Itam B'seich Tumaisam, that the Eibusher is always there. The relationship between a Yid and the Eibusher is always complete and always there, no matter what the circumstances are. And a Yid could always jump straight into learning Torah and doing mitzvahs and strengthening his bond with the Eibusher. One more point is that Taharas Hamishpacha is one of the Rebbe's 10 Miftzayim. We know it's called Taharas Hamishpacha, not Taharas Isha, the Rebbe's Medayik. It's one of the Rebbe's 10 Miftzayim. It's not just to be Mekarev Frei Yidden that they should keep Taharas Hamishpacha. For every Chassid, if it's one of the Rebbe's 10 Miftzayim, it has a special Yakros for us, and we have to have a special Chayis and a Koch in this mitzvah. And the most effective way to have a Koch in this mitzvah is to review the halachas and know the halachas well. Again, Hashikha Mitzuya, like the Rav said. And it's very common that we need to review the halachas on a regular basis together with our wives. And this shir is just a beginning to spark, hopefully, your interest and get you excited again to review the halachas. But ultimately, it's important to review the halachas inside in a sefer and see it yourself, and also be in touch with the Rav on a regular basis when a shaila comes up. So the first thing is Ketzad and Tmas, how a woman becomes a Nidda. So we have in Shulchan Aruch, it brings down in Simkuf Pei Gimel that a woman who has dam come from the mocker, bein be'inis, bein berotzin, whatever the cause, as we'll see in a minute, she becomes a Nidda, and it's v'husha tagish, she has to feel, b'tziyase, she has to feel when the blood comes out. So in other words, in Shulchan Aruch it says that a woman who has if there's uterine blood coming from the mocker, which is the uterus, and it discharges, it comes out, so she becomes a Nidda when the re'iyas dam, when the bleeding is accompanied with hargasha. This is going to be Nidda mid'erai. Misha yargish, that she feels, Misha targish, that nakar mim koimai, that she feels the blood leave, so she becomes tamei, afal pishliat salachutz. So technically, a woman could become tamei tumas Nidda even before the blood leaves the body, because there was hargasha, she felt the blood leave the uterus. Okay, so we'll discuss that in a minute. And even tipas tam kechardel makes a woman a Nidda, even the smallest amount, and it says even pachas mizeh, even less than that is going to make her Nidda. And it makes no difference if she's married, she's single, it makes no difference if she's, no matter what, if a woman's a Nidda, if somebody chas v'shalom has relations with a Nidda, it's an Isser Kares for the husband and for the wife, for the man and for the woman. So in general, the first thing we want to define is basically discuss a little bit the concept of hargosha, what it means that a woman has a sensation, she feels the blood leave the uterus. What exactly, we have to define that term and properly understand if that exists today or how that exists today. So hargosha again means that a woman feels the blood leave her uterus. So the first way that's brought down is based on the Rambam, that she basically feels, she feels her, internally she feels her body shake, she feels the blood leave the uterus in a form of a zazu, in a form of a shaking or a trembling or some sort of movement of the uterus. Now, this is considered not common today. It's kemat unheard of that a woman should feel that zazua, and therefore that's not a commonplace hargosha that quote unquote a woman should feel. Likewise, there's also brought down, and the Mechaber brings down that she feels that a woman she feels psichas hamakar lahitzi dam. She feels the uterus open to discharge blood. So that would also be a hargosha that accompanies the bleeding, and that's again something that's not common today. It's kemat unheard of that a woman should feel a hargosha of psichas hamakar lahitzi dam. The third category is called zivas davar lach, that she feels a wetness, a flow, some sort of wetness. The poskim, there's discussed in this big machlekes poskim where exactly the zivas davar lach is. So we're going to have soon in Parshas Mitzvah, it says that isha kisiya zava, a woman who has a flow, dami azeva bifsara, she feels the flow bifsara. It doesn't say mipsara, it says bifsara, which the Gemara says that acha targish bifsara. She has to feel the blood leave the uterus bifsara, internally within her body. So most women today, when they're feeling a davar lach, they're feeling a wetness, some sort of flow, they're feeling it already mibachutz. They're feeling it already leave the body, outside of the body. And that's not the hargosha the Torah spoke about. The hargosha the Torah spoke about that accompanies the bleeding, that makes her nidda midiraisa, is something internal. It's mibifnim. Where mibifnim becomes a whole discussion in the poskim. Is it dafke feel, or even if she feels it leaving in the vaginal canal itself, even if she feels it in the nartek, is that already considered a zivas davar lach? So that could sometimes exist today. Again, it's not so common, but it could exist. And what's important to remember is that if there's a genuine hargosha, again, a genuine hargosha means a hargosha that's mibifnim, which the Torah described as a hargosha. Such a hargosha would require a woman to make a bdika, to check if there's dam or no dam. Because if she feels the hargosha, she feels, for example, the makar open, which again is not common today, then she has to make a bdika. And the halacha becomes, if she finds dam, then she's nidda, because she had a hargosha and she sees dam on the bdika. If the bdika is clean, she's weiter nidda, because even tipas dam kechadel makes her nidda. And if she felt the makar open, she felt the hargosha, so the fact that the bdika came out without any blood on it, maybe there was a small amount of blood and she didn't catch it. It's only if there's a mara tahar on the bdika, which means there's a substantial something on the bdika cloth, like some sort of clean discharge that's not dam, that's when you could be toila that what did she feel? She felt this mara tahar. And that's when she's not going to become nidda as a result of the bdika that accompanies the hargosha. But the reality is today, hargosha is not common. So when a woman thinks she's having a hargosha, then the first step would be to speak to a rav if that's taka hargosha that requires her to make a bdika. Because once she runs and makes a bdika, then you have to deal with the shaila of what happens on the bdika. But the question is if she bichlal had to make a bdika, because she only has to make a bdika if the hargosha is a genuine hargosha, what the chacham said is a hargosha, what the Torah says is a hargosha, which is mibifnim, not mibachutz. And most women, when they're feeling a hargosha, it's already as it's leaving the body, it's already mibachutz, and that's not a hargosha. She could just look in her undergarments and see what she sees, and that'll clarify, but she doesn't have a chiv to make a bdika. She could clarify what's going on. But she could maybe put a pad, she could maybe, which is not makabel tuma, we'll see later, so it's not gonna, it'll create less shilas. She could maybe put a tissue inside her undergarment and see what comes up, but to actually make a bdika creates a strong problematic question, and that's going to be, is not commonplace today. The hargosha the Torah spoke about, because what's most common today when a woman feels that she's bleeding is already when there's some sort of zivas davar lach mibachutz, which is not, that's not the hargosha the Torah spoke about. It has to be mibifnim. And if she thinks she's having a hargosha that's mibifnim, so it's best to consult her Rav and figure out if it's taka. It's so not common today that therefore it's best to ask a Rav, that Rav will ask a few shilas and clarify if that's taka hargosha that requires a bdika or not. But now getting back to the original statement that the Mechaber says that midei raisa, for a woman to become nidda, there has to be the iyas dam accompanied with hargosha. There has to be a sighting of blood together with hargosha. The question is, how do we have nidda midei raisa bisman hazeh if on average women are not having these hargoshas? And this is already a few hundred years. that the poskim are discussing the shaila of not seeing hargasha. Apparently, nishtanu ativim or the sadaitis, there's some sort of part of the process that we're less sensitive to the physical sensations within our bodies, and women are not having these internal hargashas when they're having a riyas dam. So the question becomes, where do we find this nida midiraisa bisman hazeh? So the category number one is going to be when a woman gets her period, when there's which means when she menstruates, when she has a riyas dam. It's called in modern Hebrew a machzor. In halacha it's called a veses. But basically, when she gets her cycle, which is every single month, she gets her cycle typically. So when the cycle comes, that's considered riyas midiraisa. There's no hargasha. So we say that based on the Rambam, there's chaskas adam sheba hargasha. There's a chazakah that when she bleeds her cycle, it's with hargasha. So even though today bisman hazeh woman has her cycle, it's classified as nida midiraisa, and that'll have ramifications, as we'll see later. The difference between midirabanan and midiraisa, that sometimes there are more kulis involved with a shaila that comes up if a woman's nida. And again, to reiterate, once a woman is nida, definitively nida, whether it's deraisa or derabanan, makes no difference. Once a woman's nida, automatically there's hamtanas chamisha yamim, there's 5, and then there's hafsek tara, there's shiva nekiyim, there's mikveh. The regular process is the same. Whether she became nida midiraisa or midirabanan, it makes no difference. It's going to have the same process of her becoming tahor. However, if there's a doubt, if there's a shaila, and if she became nida as a result of something that took place, as we'll see the various different questions that come up, we'll see throughout the shir. So then, if it's a shaila deraisa derabanan, obviously he's going to have different ways of handling it and different ways of being mitzad if things lahakil. So that'll be important. But the classic case of a woman getting her riyas dam, getting her period, that's going to be considered nida midiraisa bisman hazeh. So, which means to say, I'll get back to this a little later. First, we'll discuss a little bit the concept of a bedika. So, again, a bedika is often referred to as an eid habdika because it's bearing witness to what's going on. That when a woman does a bedika, she takes a bedika cloth, which is a small little white cloth, and she inserts the cloth and does a bedika and sees if there's any coloring, what's on the bedika. So, generally speaking, we consider blood that's found on a bedika cloth, we consider it to be nida midiraisa. What's the reason behind this? Why so? Because while she makes the bedika, she feels her finger poking around, and it could be at that moment blood left the mucker, came out, and went on the bedika cloth. So she technically would have felt the hargasha. She technically would have felt the blood leave the mucker. But because she was distracted, because she was feeling her finger move around, this is going to be classified as nida midiraisa. It's not going to be midrabanan. And therefore, even the smallest amount of blood, even a tipas dam kechardel, is a problem, makes her nida. So it can't be ignored. So when we look at a bedika needs to be looked at properly, and even a small amount of blood is problematic. And if the coloring is not so certain, then you bring it to a Rav and get a psak from the Rav. So the general colors, if it's clear or if it's a pale yellow, or it's also brought down blue and green, which are not common colors that will come out, those are permitted. But most other colors are a problem, or a shaila at least. If it's brown, if it's coffee color, if it's mustard color, if it's a golden color, if it has shades of brown, shades of pink, or things like that, you bring it to the Rav and let the Rav paskin what's going on to give a psak if it's good or not good. Every Rav has a drop box, you could drop it off at the Rav, and it's important to label the bedika what it is, because it could have an effect on the psak. So it's very important to label what it is. Is it a hefsek tara? Is it a meichdochuk? Is it yem rishon? Is it yem shvi? If it's going to be mikvanite, then it's important to write it on the envelope that it's urgent. Mikvanite, like you want to make sure that the Rav sees the envelope from amongst the envelopes that come and hopefully answers it sooner. Also, it's obviously the option number one is to actually bring the shaila into the Rav and in person ask the shaila to the Rav. Number one, it's not common, but it could happen. The shaila could get lost, chas v'shalom, and that's a big problem. And like I had a younger man call me already once that a shaila got lost, and it was very stressful for a couple when such a thing comes up, because very often you have to be a machmir, and it can be very difficult. He brought it to the Rav, and whatever it is, just drop it off. 99% of the time, you're not going to have a problem. It's going to come to the Rav's desk, and the Rav will call and answer the shaila. But number two, especially when we're younger light, we don't have shimush. It's difficult to give broad definitions with colors because everybody handles colors differently, and it's really a trained eye that needs to handle it. And therefore, discharge is common, colors are common, permitted colors are common, and therefore, and questionable colors are common. So you bring it into the Rav, you ask the Rav hopefully the Rav will be able to clarify if this is a shaila in the future, it's not a shaila, or give you a little bit of an education in the process when you drop off a shaila. It just takes a minute to go into the Rav's office, but you get a little more information as a result of taking that extra step versus just dropping it off. So again, it's perfectly fine to drop it off. Important to label it properly, put your name on it, mention what it is, because it could have an effect on the psak. And if you have the time, it's always recommended to go into the Rav and actually speak to him in person and get a little more clarification. Now, in general, also, when you have a shaila and you call it Rav, it's just a ma'amar musker, that we don't shop around, we don't call, you should be in the habit of calling the same Rav every time. Hopefully the Rav gets to know you also. You could ask a shaila anonymously, but if you ask a shaila anonymously, then you get an answer that's given to someone who asks something anonymously. If you get to know the Rav knows who you are. Basically, if you get to know the Rav a little bit, if you just call the first Rav that picks up the phone, sometimes, the answer is not thorough enough to really deal with your personal circumstances. And once you get a psak, that's the psak. That's what you have to do. That's where you are. You could always call the Rav back and say, I think I left out some details, and let the Rav tell you if there is a change in the psak, but usually the psak is the psak. Also, if for whatever reason you call the Rav that's not your regular Rav, and then you got a psak, and then you finally were able to reach your regular Rav, you will have to tell him that you spoke to another Rav, and this is what he said, and the Rav will answer you accordingly. But in general, Rabbanim are very busy, and they're on the phone all the time, so if you don't reach the Rav, try again, and I hope it's okay if I say this for the Rabbanim, but you try again 10, 20 minutes later, and maybe you'll reach him, because that's the process, that the phone is ringing, Baruch Hashem, over, off the hook. So if you don't reach him, so call again in a few minutes. If you just go through 10 Rabbanim's phone numbers and call whoever picks up the phone first, it doesn't always work to your advantage, because sometimes where you catch it of, where he is, how he answers the shaila could all have an effect. People are still people at the end of the day. So obviously a Rav is Yerushalayim and he answers the shaila properly, but if you have a Rav that you go to every time, he knows who you are, he knows what you're dealing with, then it's a whole, even just recently, again, I don't paskin shailas, I'm not a Rav, but a younger man called me with, it's urgent, he can't reach the Rav, he wanted to know if I could help him with a certain shaila. From what I heard his shaila, I didn't think there was anything I could do to help him. I give him a psak, I'm not a Rav, but I wasn't sure what to tell him. I just told him, I'll text the Rav, and if the Rav sees maybe my number, maybe he'll realize, maybe he'll pay attention, because he maybe gets a bunch of texts at night, and lavdafke he's answering shailas for this hour, but if he sees, okay, so Lepoil, he was able to get a hold of the Rav, Baruch Hashem, and again, from my knowledge, which is not extensive, I didn't see where there's room to be makel, and Baruch Hashem, there was room to be makel in this case, because he had an emergency shaila that I wasn't aware of, and totally not aware of. Once the next day he explained everything, that it was a lot clearer. But if he was an emergency, mamish, it was a big emergency. He needed an answer right away. If he called whichever Rav answered the phone first, he doesn't have the guy doesn't know the past few months what's going on and what the details of the shaila is. So the Rav probably would have passed in the Chumrah. In this specific case, when he actually reached the Rav that was dealing with and knew the whole background and was guiding him through the process, it was more a personalized psak exactly to what he needed. And again, that goes to the same sugya that everybody always mentions, that you hear your friend got a psak for this, he got a psak for this. We don't borrow things, or we don't always understand the exact circumstances, the background. It's always important to build your own personal relationship with a Rav, to be able to speak to a Rav, reach out to a Rav, have a shaila, call a Rav, and not just rely on the fact that you read in a sefer or someone said, or today AI or whatever on Google or whatever it is, you find an answer here, an answer there. Even on Chabad.org, it doesn't always work like that. I once, in Lamashal, it's just a random thing. It's not a get to this sugya, but Lamashal in today's day and age, the Rabbanim paskin that with a moich dochuk, you shouldn't go out on Shabbos if there's no Eidiv. That's the common psak. And Lamashal, I saw online on a Chabad website, and the Rav paskins that there is paiskim that paskin that you could go out with a moich dochuk on Shabbos even if there's no Eidiv. But from the Rabbanim I spoke to here locally in Crown Heights said that we don't paskin like that. That's not the psak. But Lamashal on a Chabad website, it brought a Rav from a different place who said that we are samech on that. So in other words, you don't just read online a psak. It's important for you. We don't shop around. We don't look around. We have a Rav. We ask a Rav a shaila, and whatever the Rav says, that's the psak, and that's what we follow. So it's important for us, even if it's quote-unquote a reliable website, there's always a backstory, and it's important for us to speak to the Rav in person. Okay, so we said again, Nidda deraisa is when there's a riyah stam together with hargasha, which commonly today is when a woman gets her machzer, gets her period. It's going to be classified as cheskas adam sheba hargasha, and perhaps lava going to be where there's a kesem. So before I get to kesem, I just want to speak briefly for a minute about kinuach. Okay, so kinuach means that when a woman went to the bathroom after ktanim, not after gdolim, then it's not a problem if she sees red on the tissue. But if a woman goes to the bathroom for ktanim and she looks at her tissues and sees some blood on the tissues, so there's a whole shaila, it's a whole sugya, how do we handle kinuach? If we go l'kula, l'chumra, or how we handle it. So just to give a little bit of background of the shaila. So when it comes to a kesem, which is a stain where there was blood found on the undergarments without any hargosha, so in such a case, the chachamim were geyser tumas nidda on a kesem, even if there's no hargosha. It's midrabanan. However, the chacham were only geyser if three conditions are in place. What are the three conditions? As we'll go again through them soon, more in detail, but just on one foot, the three conditions are, it has to be on white, it has to be the size kigris v'oid, which is typically an American dime, and it has to be on something that's makabel tumah. So if one of those conditions are not in place, we're not geyser tumah. So, for example, a tissue is not makabel tumah, so even if the tissue is white, it has nothing to do with the size, it has nothing to do with the color. If it's not makabel tumah, if we quote unquote look at a kinuach as a kesem, then it's lahakel because it's not on something that's makabel tumah. However, when a woman does a kinuach, it's going to be we basically the shaila becomes perhaps we should classify it as a bedika, and it should be considered to be something where there's it's basically a shaila midiraisa now because perhaps there was hargosha v'lavadaita, and there's various different elements to this. There could be the fact that it's after hatalas meiraglayim, because hatalas meiraglayim, when a woman goes to when you go to the bathroom, that sensation resembles the sensation of hargosha, and therefore it could disguise the hargosha. There was a hargosha, and you didn't notice it because you felt the hatalas meiraglayim, and then you do the kinuach right away. So it could be riyaz dam accompanied with hargosha. If it's riyaz dam accompanied with hargosha, you have no tzad lahokil mitzad kesem. It's not a kesem. It's a riyaz dam accompanied with hargosha. Or there could be, like we say, bedika shema argasha v'lavadaita. There's a possibility that there was hargosha, but she didn't pay attention to it because she felt the sensation from the wiping. So therefore, kinuach becomes a shaila for a rav that on a very classic black and white case, it's l'chumra. But a rav, when he's called from a couple about a shaila and kinuach, the rav is going to do his best to see if the stadim l'hakil, what the situation is, and ask a few questions to see what the circumstances are and give you a psak. So what happens is, recommendation number one is that regarding kinuach, after ktanim, it's recommended not to look at your tissues. The woman shouldn't look at her tissues. So she just wipes and then she flushes and then she could look. Because whether to look at the tissue itself or to look even in the toilet is still problematic. So best is not to look at her tissues altogether. If she does look at her tissues, then she should speak to the Rav and find out what to do. Don't make a bedika because a bedika is not going to save you for the shaila in the kinuach. The kinuach still becomes a shaila. But definitely, Rabbanim Mechabar are machmer by kinuach b'derech klal, which means it's a shaila for a Rav and should lechatchila be avoided. But if in the case where it wasn't avoided and a kinuach was looked at, you should speak to a Rav and right away figure out what to do. So now, in general, if you have the tissue, then save the tissue and you could bring it to the Rav. If it's in the toilet, you have to call the Rav and describe to him what you see. But again, best thing is not to look at it. If you look at it, then bring it to the Rav. If you don't have it, then you'll just call the Rav and see what he says. Now, in general, there's also an idea there could be sometimes blood in the urine. It's also a shaila for the Rav. In general, the Rav is probably going to send you. But in general, anytime there's something that's inserted internally within the woman, which resembles a bedika, is going to, if there's blood found on it, it's going to be a problem midei raisa. And therefore, even the smallest amount of blood is going to be a problem. Even if the color is questionable, it's going to be often a problem. It's something that causes a lot of problems. So the classic case we said is a bedika. Bedika, you have to look at the bedika. The whole point of making a bedika is to look at it. So obviously, you have to look at it. But if, for whatever reason, a woman is putting something else up, and it's best to avoid looking at it. So examples of that could be, sometimes there are certain birth controls that, if used with a heter from a Rav, they're inserted or taken out. So like there's a diaphragm or a nuvo ring. There are certain birth controls like that when a woman takes them out, she should do it with the light off maybe, or she shouldn't look and just rinse it under water before she looks at it, so that way she doesn't see anything on it. If a woman has to put medication and use an applicator, which is a tube that she puts up, so right there, when she takes it out, either just, if it's disposable, just throw it out without looking at it, wrap it in a paper towel and throw it out, or she should maybe wash it without looking at it or with the light off before, because again, the moment you look at it, it creates a problem. Or if a woman is worried maybe her period's going to come, so if she decides to put a tampon in, Weiter, it's going to be classified, even though it's not Makabal Tumah, it's going to be a problem because if it's inserted up, it creates that resembling that bedika, and it creates a shaila midiraisa. And if something is found on it, it right away makes a nidda. So if a woman's not sure if her period's coming and she wants to just take extra precautions, she could put a pad in, because again, most of the place can typically say that a synthetic pad is not makabel tuma, and therefore it's not a problem mitzat ksamim, or she could put a tissue and see, but to actually put something up is going to be problematic. It's going to create problems, so it's best to avoid that. And if, for whatever reason, something needs to be put up, then avoid, if you can, looking at it, unless it's obviously a bedika, and then you have to look at it. Otherwise, we want to avoid looking at it so we don't fall into a case where we have a shaila like that. Okay, so now cases. Her machzer, her riyas dam, her period, or we said there is also the bedika and kinuach. Now we have the case of a kesem. So how exactly does a kesem work? So midaraisa, a kesem is where randomly she just finds dam on her undergarments. So it could be on her undergarment, her underwear. It could be on her sheet, her linen. It could be on a towel that's used But if she finds blood on a garment, so then it just appears. If it just appears randomly in the middle of the month, then this is a classic case of a kesem, and it's midiraisa, not a problem because there was no hargasha. But midrabanan, this becomes a shaila. So a shaila which is addressed in the following way: that the chacham only goes there tumas ksamim if three conditions are met, like we mentioned earlier, and we'll go through each one of them. So the first one is that it has to be larger than a gris. So what exactly does that mean? So the Gemara tells us that in the olden days it was common to have bugs all around, kinam machilas, and there's something called dinit liya, that if a woman is, if even the smallest amount of blood were geyser tumas ksamim, then every woman's going to become nidda every night. You're not going to let people live because every night there's little bugs, there's insects. What's the floor? Everything is full of bugs. In the olden days, your floor is sand and your bed and everything is, there's little insects everywhere, and you roll around a little bit, then you squash these little bugs and they create little red dots. And then you have tumas ksamim every single day. So the chacham were only geyser if it's a substantial amount of blood that you can't be toilet in kinam machelis, you can't be toilet anymore in a common household bug. So once it reaches beyond the shear of gris v'oid, then it's going to be problematic. If it's less than a gris v'oid, then so again, this is a whole discussion in the Poskim, and we know from the Alter Rebbe that the Alter Rebbe's brother writes that the Alter Rebbe measured the shear and said it's the size of piatik shel kesef, and you have the shit of Rebbe Chaim Noah, but it's today the Rabbanan Paskin that it's basically 17 millimeters, which is the size of an American dime. So that's typically you at home you could figure out the shear yourself, that if a stain is found and it's smaller than an American dime, then it's going to be fine. You could be makel. However, very often the shape is not perfectly round, and if it's in a funny shape, then it's difficult to assess the exact size, and that's why often you'll just bring it to a Rav, and the Rav with his trained eye will be able to give a psak very quickly of the shear, the size. So that's regarding the size. Now, if there's multiple stains, so if it's one stain, it's clearly there's one stain, you can see the shear. But if there's multiple stains, so if they're connected, then we're mitzadef the stains. But if they're not connected, we're not mitzadef them. We judge each stain individually, and then there could be room to be makel. Also, sometimes there are permitted colors mixed with non-permitted colors, so the Rav could evaluate the stain accordingly. So even if you see a large stain, and it's larger than a gris, it still is a shaila for a Rav very often, because even the color itself, there could be different shades of brown or things mixed together, and there could be permitted colors with non-permitted colors, and then the Rav will take a look at it and see and give you a psak. So that's important to remember. There are exceptions to the rule, which is, the exception to the rule is a black stain. So a black stain is going to be a problem even if it's smaller than a gris, because blood that comes from bugs, we can't be toilet in bugs if it's black. However, in today's day and age, black is considered extremely uncommon, that women should have discharge. Reason to be toilets and something else, maybe there's maybe there could be makeup or a marker or something in the laundry. I don't know, something there could be, you could see what the situation is, because technically even a small amount of black is a problem. However, it's extremely uncommon that there should be a discharge of that color. So if a shayla like that does surface, then you should also, sometimes you didn't examine the begadim beforehand, and they're old or they're not fresh, and there could be things that the Rav will look at. Black means black. That's it. If it's a shade, then it more resemble the problematic colors. Black means that it's fully black, and then basically it's considered a problem because you can't be toilet in it's considered concentrated red, and the blood from the bugs doesn't consider to turn that color. entirely black. Again, but when there's a shaila, you speak to a Rav and see the Rav will give a psak. Also, if there's a stain on the body in a place that it clearly came from Oisim Mochkin, so then it could be a problem. It's a machlekes already. It's a machlekes Rishonim, and it could be a problem even if it's smaller than a gris. It's a machlekes if it's a problem or not. So it's something that we have to address with the Rav if there's a stain on the body. And again, today people wear tight begadim, and the Rav will handle the shaila with various different questions that the Rav will ask and give you a psak. But again, it's not common that there should be a stain on the body. But if there is a stain, again, it could come from your fingers, it could come from other places. There's today women are busy with their kids, and sometimes somebody has a cut or somebody has something. So, a few questions are going to be asked by the Rav. But technically, if there's a stain on the body in a place where it could easily come from Oisim Mochkin, kinuach is not considered a stain. It's considered a stain on the body, and you just swiped it up onto a tissue, so it's not classified anymore as a stain. It's classified as a stain on the body, which is a shaila even if it's smaller than a gris. That's also one of the things that comes up when we talk about kinuach. So again, condition number one for a kesem is going to be that it has to be, we said, it has to be the size of a gris. Now, condition number two is that it has to be on white, because if it's not on white, we can't clearly identify what the color is. So when a woman finds a kesem, if the kesem is on a colored garment, it's not a problem. And white means white. Anything other than white is not a shaila. Some Rabbanim feel that off-white could be a question, so then if you have that question, call the Rav. But b'derech klal, as a general rule, white is white. There are different shades of white, but white is white, and everything other than white is fine. So therefore, Chazal advised that women should avoid wearing white undergarments aside for the time of the month during Shiva Nikiyim where you have to wear white undergarments. But outside of that window of time, we should avoid wearing white undergarments so we don't have these shilas. And likewise, the same would apply to the linen and the towels, that we should avoid using white so we don't have these shilas surfacing from time to time. So again, the second one is the colored garments, that if it's on white, it's a shaila. So just to elaborate a little more, sometimes you have white undergarments where, again, it's not fully white. There's some little parts of it that are white. There could be stripes, there could be dots, there could be various different colors, and amongst the colors there's white. So if a stain is found on an undergarment that has multiple colors, so the shaila is going to apply only to the going to be okay. And again, sometimes it's very difficult to evaluate that, and a Rav will be consulted. And the third category is that it has to be on something that's makabel tumah, which again it has to do with in the times of Chazal when we were going to tumah, on the beged itself could become tamei. So if you have something that it says it would be a little bit like a joke if somehow the woman was not tamei, but the beged became tamei. So what we do is basically if the beged itself is not makabel tumah, the woman's not going to be considered tamei either. So that applies with Manazah as well, that only a beged that's makabel tumah, only something that's makabel tumah is going to be problematic for a kesem, but if it's not makabel tumah, then the chacham are not goyzer tumas kesem on something that's not makabel tumah. So typically a beged is makabel tumah, so undergarments fall into that category. Likewise, linen will fall into that category, but toilet paper is not makabel tumah, but it could be a shaila for kinuach, like we mentioned earlier. Pads that are synthetic, not reusable, are classified as not makabel tumah, and therefore even if the pads are white, it's not a problem, because if a small stain is found on it, so sometimes, for whatever reason, in the middle of the month, a woman decides to put in a pad, the pad, if a small stain is found on it, it's not going to be makabel tumah. because it's not makabel tumah, it's not going to be a shaila of a kesem. The floor or something that's mechuber lakarka is not makabel tumah, so like the toilet, for example, the toilet seat or something, but a beged is definitely makabel tumah. So now, in general, even if you have all three requirements, that it's on white, it's larger than a gris, and it's something that's makabel tumah, but if you bring it to the Rav and the Rav says that it's not a problematic color, then it's going to be fine. And also, there's dinei tliya that sometimes it could be taila b'makkah. Sometimes there could be a makkah that happened, and in the case of a makkah, it's not just something that we quote-unquote take your word for it. It's something that a woman who's going to have to go to a beidekes, who's going to check and see if there's a makkah and the dam that's there is reflective of the makkah, and then the Rav will give a psak based on the report from the beidekes to decide if you could be taila the dam that is technically problematic in the makkah, and then it's not dam from the rechem, it's not from the uterus, and then it's not a problem, and then it's associated with the makkah. So that could sometimes be also a case where we're going to go leheter, we're going to go lekula, because you have dinei tliya, hargasha. Again, we spoke about it already earlier, but I just want to summarize on that point that sometimes the shaila comes up that towards the end of the month, it's common that sometimes before the onset of the period, there's staining. There's a little bit of, little ksamim that surface before the actual Re'iyas Dam starts. And people often have the question, what do I do? When is the period classified to have begun? When does Nidda start? Which has a lot of ramifications, because obviously you have Archokis and you'll have the halachas of the calendar. You have to properly document when the period starts, when the Re'iyas Dam starts. So we need to know this information. So how do we figure it out? So it's classified once the actual flow starts. That's going to be considered when the period has started, not from the Ksumim. And in general, what happened? But however, if the kesem is at the time a month when she's assuming her machzor is going to come, her period is going to come, so at that time, if it's a substantial amount of dam, then it's going to be classified as the beginning of her period already. So even though it's on something like a pad that's not makabel tumah, or it's on a colored undergarment, if it's a substantial amount of dam, then it's going to be considered like the beginning of her Re'iyas Dam already, her period already. So for the general shear that's given, it's a shear kamas dam that's given in the name of Rav Moshe, that Rabbanim say is like the amount of a $50 bill or a credit card. It's a large amount. Or if it goes through multiple bugadim, some people say is also a siman that you could use. Or if it's a very, very thick amount of blood that's not even going through the beged, or a different simanim that sometimes could be helpful. You could ask your Rav, what are good simanim to differentiate what's considered a kesem at that time of month, or what's considered already like it's the beginning of the onset of the period and has to be marked accordingly. But either way, when these ksamim start to surface before she gets her period, around that time of month, it's often an eitzah tova to still be peidish for 24 hours, and that's what Rabbanim say, just to see what's going on, because she lav dafke becomes nida. Not lav dafke. She won't become nida from a kesem if it's on colored or it's on a synthetic pad, and if it's a small amount, it's not going to make her nida. However, if it's at the time of month when her period's going to come within a few hours, probably it's best, even though there's no harchakis and she's not nida yet, and you don't mark it on the calendar yet, but just to be peidish at least from tashmish for the meantime, just because you give yourself a few hours and see what's going on and see what's going to happen, and things will clarify itself. So that sometimes is an eitzah tova just to get clarification of when to actually properly define when she's becoming nida or not. So another time that a woman becomes nida is going to be like we have in Isha Kisazriya, that a woman who's and V'yolda V'tama Kiminis Nidas Dvaisa, that we have in Parashat Tazriya, that a woman who gives birth to a baby, Tumas Yoldis, that a woman who gives birth, she becomes nida midiraisa. So the question that often surfaces is, when exactly does she become nida as a result of giving birth to the baby? As a result, when does Tumas Yoldis when does Tumas Leida kick in? When does it start? So it's Bechlal recommended that towards the end of the pregnancy, a couple should call a Rav and get answers to this question. Ask, when does Tumas Leida kick in? Because different Rabbanim have different gdarim that they give outside of the general broad klalim. There are broad klalim we'll discuss in a minute. Outside of them, there are additional details that some Rabbanim, information they give to the couple, for the couple to know. So it's important to call the Rav to ask him, when does she become nida as a result of Tumas Leida? Because you're going to have to know when the harchakis kick in during the process of labor. Also, you're going to want to ask a shayla regarding Hilchos Shabbos, because sometimes you have to prepare in advance how to go to the hospital on Shabbos if such a case surfaces. And when it actually surfaces, you just go, because it's pekuach nefesh. But if you speak to the Rav in advance, you could get already clarification what's the best way to go on Shabbos to the hospital and prepare accordingly. So, so the general understanding of when Tumas Leida starts is, number one, is if she sees blood. If there's blood, and it's obviously coming from the rechem. If there's blood, it's going to make her it's going to be Tumas Leida already. It already makes her nida. So that's going to be if there's, for example, if her water breaks. So if it's a small amount of water, she could see if there's blood there. If it's a large amount of water, a lot of Rabbanim are concerned there's blood there even if you don't see it. So it's a shayla for a Rav. If the mucus plug comes out, also you could look at it and see if there's dam there, or you could ask a shayla to a Rav. So that was the first one, when it becomes, when she sees dam. Another one is when the contractions become very strong and she's basically cannot walk without help anymore. She already needs help to get around. So it's already considered like the labor progressed to such an extent that we assume the rechem opened already, or if she's already yesheves ala mashber, she's ready to go on the birthing bed and deliver the baby. So that also becomes a time when we consider the rechem to have opened, and she becomes nida already. Some rabbanim have a siman for exactly for how many centimeters she's dilated. Could also sometimes possibly put her in a state of nida already. So if labor starts and you go to the hospital and then labor sometimes stops in the middle, it's important to consult with the Rav to find out if she's nida yet or not, or how to conduct yourself. But again, the general classification for Tumas Leida is going to be if you see dam, or she's ready to deliver the baby, she's Yeshavas al Mashber, she can't walk anymore because the contractions are so frequent and so intense that she can't walk without help. So another way that a woman becomes a Nidda Bizman Hazeh is a medical examination. Automatically consider it to be Dam Nidda. So any medical exam, in other words, a gynecological exam, an exam done by a gynecologist that's going inside through the vaginal canal up and opening up the cervix, opening up the uterus, and doing an exam, it's going to create a state of Nidda on a woman. So this becomes something that often you have to speak to a Rav to get proper guidance, because when a medical exam is done, so the typical routine exams done during pregnancies are usually fine. But non-routine exams, or if there's a specific exam the doctor wants to do, it's important for the couple to speak to the doctor and speak to the Rav to basically get the full details. Sometimes you speak to the Rav first and hear from the Rav what shaylas you should ask the doctor, and then you speak to the doctor and ask him all the details you need about the medical exam. What's the medical exam called? What kind of device he's using? Where is he going? Is he going to the cervix? Is he going to the uterus? Is he going to the lower part of the cervix, the external laws, or the inner part of the cervix, the internal laws? What kind of speculum is he using? What's the shear? What's the size of it? How much is it opening the cervix? There are different questions that the Rav might ask you to ask, and based on that, the Rav will give a psak if she's becoming Nidda or not. And there's a lot of different opinions amongst the poskim, but we have the Shita of Alter Rebbe that the Rav will paskin accordingly. So the Rav is going to need to know the information in order to give the psak. Usually these procedures are scheduled in advance. So when you ask the shayla to the doctor, you'll know if it's causing her to become a Nidda or not, and then you'll schedule the appointment when she's a Nidda anyways, if it makes her Nidda, or if you have no choice, you have no choice, but at least you know if it makes her Nidda or not. And this has nothing to do with age. Even if a woman's technically a skena, or even if she's mishlek is damim, or even if she's pregnant, if a medical exam is done that makes her Nidda, it makes her Nidda. Because this is the klal. So that's something that's important for us to remember, and don't just rely on the doctor, even if the doctor is a frum yid, because there are different shittis. When the cervix, for example, gets opened, it could cause the uterus to get opened. So some rabbanim, depending on how much is open, sometimes there are poskim who say it is a problem, some poskim will say it's not a problem. It's a poskim, and it could be the doctor knows from his Rav or knows from most of his patients what the Rav usually told them, that it's not a problem. Maybe your Rav will tell you it is a problem. So in general, even if the doctor is a Yer Shamayim, which Baruch Hashem, there are very good doctors out there who know halacha as well, but nonetheless, respectfully, you still ask your Rav, and mistama, the opinions will align themselves, and it will be the same, but it's important for you to speak to a Rav when you have a shay like this comes up. So to conclude, another case that a woman, also it happens, there's also a case where if there's a trauma and a woman sees dam, it could also be considered a dam deraisa, nidin mideraisa, because she definitely won't feel the hargasha if there's a trauma, if there's a sudden accident or a crisis or a terrible news or something incredibly intense like that happens and she sees dam. So you should always speak to a Rav if such a thing happens, chas v'sholem. And I forgot to mention, there's tumas later, there's also something called, there's also the tumah that's associated with hapala, with the miscarriage, Rahman al-Litzlan, which should never happen, but if such a thing happens, so if it'll also create a tumah that a woman will come Nidda as a result of a miscarriage. And always in such a case, speak to your doctor when such a thing happens, and speak to the Rav as well. There is sometimes, again, during pregnancy, usually a woman doesn't bleed, but sometimes it happens that in the first trimester there's bleeding. Sometimes it could be a miscarriage, but it could also be like a little pressure that's being put on the uterine lining that's causing bleeding during pregnancy. It's called a hematoma, and such a thing, if it happens, she will become Nidda from bleeding that's coming from the uterus. Baruch Hashem, if they get it checked out by the doctor, and Baruch Hashem, it's not a miscarriage, but they'll have to deal with the shayla of Nidda, and it's important to speak to the Rav to get to A, confirm if she's Nidda, and B, get assistance with how to navigate the Shiva Nikiyim, because sometimes in such a case it could be a little bit stressful and difficult, and hopefully it's not, but such a thing could surface, and it also could make her Nidda. Sometimes there's bleeding that could happen, but it's not coming from the uterus, it's coming from the cervix or a little lower, and again, it's always important to speak to a Rav. The Rav might send you to a Beidekes to see where the blood is coming from, and again, give you a psak accordingly what to do. Another case that a woman becomes a Nidda is if she says Tameani, if she says I'm Tamei, if she brings upon herself Tumas Nidda. It could be that it could be a gather of a neder, it could be a gather of shavia and afshech techadei yisura. She brings an isra upon herself. She says she's a nida. However, if she's chayzer techadei dibor, or she has an amasla, a valid excuse of why she said it, she explains herself that she said it for this and this reason because at the moment she had to put herself in a position where she told her husband she's a Nidda, but later she retracted her steps and gave a legitimate excuse. In such a case, we wouldn't apply the halachas of Nidda. A woman should be accustomed to not saying, I became a Nidda until she's 100% sure. She should basically better say, I think I became a Nidda until she's 100% sure, because once she says it, it technically could bring a problem upon herself, and she needs to first speak to her Rav to see if the amasla is an appropriate amasla. So, again, there's also dam sulim, but we're not going to go into it here because it's more a share of chazara. If people are younger light and if dam sulim is a shaila that you have, you should speak to the Rav or speak to your chassan teacher and get more clarification. Is that everything good? Clear? Anything else? Any questions?
You mentioned even Hagosha, that even though she doesn't have the Hagosha, we're going to consider inside the Chazaka. One of the cases was that she didn't have any Hagosha, but the Chazaka is that there was Hagosha.
Case of a riyas dam, of a period, is considered to be with Hagosha. So that's going to be riyah midei. Then you have the cases where if something was inserted, like a bedika or anything that was inserted, we're concerned that Shema Argasha V'Lavadaita. We're concerned that perhaps there was Hargasha, but she was distracted. So that's also going to be classified as Deraisa because we assume there was Hargasha, but V'Lavadaita. Yeah. Anybody else? Yeah. So there's a few layers to the question. The general, on one foot, it's because the Alter Rebbe in the Madura Basa is machmer by kinuach. The kinuach is treated like we assume there might have been hargasha v'lavadaita, because the sensation of wiping could create a distraction and be mavalvel that she doesn't notice the hargasha, and there was hargasha at that moment when the dam came out, exactly at that moment. So that's basically the reason why we're machmir. There are other reasons that are brought up in the Poskim also, like we said, that there could be if the kinuach is right after Meir Aglayim, the sensation of Atalas Meir Aglayim could disguise the Hargosha. There could also be that there is a cloud that if dam is clearly coming from Oisei Makim and there's no way to be toilet in anywhere else, then you don't have all the dinei tliya anymore, like you have at a regular kasem. And when the wiping is done, it's gathering it mamish from there, so it's difficult to be toilet and anything else. Some place can write like that, or there could be, like we said also earlier, that if dam is found on her goof, then we don't have the shear is not going to help you. Even a small amount becomes a problem, and and there's a possibility that we classify kinuach as being blood that's not really a stain. It's blood that's on her goof that was just wiped onto a tissue. And that's but again, you always ask a shaila for a rav. Don't just be machmir, because in these halachis, when it comes to, if you have a hechsher, you're not sure if it's a kosher or not. So be machmir and esnish. Eat something else, you'll be fine. But in these halachis, you're not machmir or meko. You always speak to a rav, because a kula could bring to a chumrah and a chumrah could bring to a kula. So these are something that we shouldn't just be machmir and that's it. She became nida. Rather, always speak to the rav. And again, if the rav says to be machmir, then you're at where you started. But maybe the rav will say there's stadim lahakil, and maybe there's things you don't know about or you didn't think about, or questions that the rav will ask that will clarify things and things will. It's a big sugya, but it could be, well, a few things. Part of it could be first of all, when a woman's in a state of nida, it puts certain challenges on the couple, so we don't want to do it unnecessarily. Second of all, there's documenting the calendar that could be inaccurate as a result of documenting when she became nida. So there could be certain cases, and there's more on that topic. It's a sugya, but there is this concept of a chumrah shemevi l'kula. There's a lot more on the subject. It's not just for the sake of yeah. It's not put in the calendar, because the calendar, we're going to learn later the halachis, the calendar only has to do with riyas dam. It's her cycle. It comes every month. If she has a baby, I don't know when the next baby's coming. There's nothing in the calendar as a result of that. It's not really going to be based on when she became nida. It's going to be when she's able to go through the Torah process is not going to be so relevant if it was on Monday or Tuesday when she had the baby. When the nida process started for Leda. It's negah because our chokes right away kick in between the couple right away. If he's but it could create extra stress on the couple that's unnecessary, and that's a problem. It's not going to be relevant to the calendar, like we said, but it could create other. It could also become a chomer shemei with the kula for other reasons, and also it could create extra stress on the couple that's not necessary, and there's no reason to put it in place if it's not needed to be there. Kinuach. So again, if she looks at the tissue, then the rav is probably going to want you to bring it in if you have it. If you don't have it, then the Rav will answer. If it's what? If it's G'daylim, no, it's nothing. Yeah, it's not a Shaila for Rav, no. It's not a problem. Yeah. Anybody else? Any other questions, or is it good? Okay. Yishkoyach, everybody, thank you so much. Thank you for your patience. Thank you for listening. And
Very special. Yishkoyach Mendel. Phenomenal job. I'm just going to take a moment for two things I would want to add. One is someone asked about black. What's black? So just like you have shimush shayla v'kesem, I would add another detail about speaking to a Rav. There's many times that a doctor, even if he's frum or kolshkin if he's not, there may not be enough gemina for him which tool he'll use or what procedure he's going to do. And Rabbanim are very behavent. They happen to know if he's around the block and he's a seasoned Rav and he's erlik d'roisha berubai, and he'll be able to tell you what to ask the doctor, how to do the procedure, and just do it differently. Not only to be mevar the mitzvahs, and it's super helpful to be bekesher with a Rav. One more detail that's important because such shilas have come to me, and it's important. As much as we're mahader machmer to tell the woman not to do bdikis, extra bdikis, and not to, if she did do a bdika and she found blood, kolshkin if there's pain, but even if there's no pain, at that point we're going to tell her to stick in a bdika. I don't know, you may have brought it up and I didn't hear, but to do another 2 times, because if she could be mevarer, she puts in the bdika or a tissue, whatever, and finds it in the same place. 3 of them, it's much easier to there's place to be makel. So, you don't need to speak to Rav. If she finds blood on a bdika or on a tissue, and she sees them, so even if she doesn't feel ke'ev, even if she doesn't feel that there's something, or she doesn't know, to put her through going to a baideket, just tell her she should go right away, right back inside, and take, again, 2 takes, and if it's going to come out on the same side of the tissue, that itself could be a birur that there's over there a problem. Right. Oh, yeah. Whether it's a seif oina of prisha, etc. Next week we're going to have a shir on Vestis. Please join Shkar for making it out. Rabbi Weiss, Rabbi Sharon Weiss is going to do it with a presentation. The slides of Laman Yilmadu. We thank Laman Yilmadu for their being open to shir. And Yishkoyach again to Reb Mendel. And we're looking forward. Shkoyach.